Good morning. Thank you for joining Mayor Brown's Global Financial Markets teleconference series. Today's call is entitled Washington Update, Reconciliation, Debt Limit, Antitrust, and Fed Noms. My name is Andrew Olmem, and I am a partner in our Washington, D.C. office and a member of the Public Policy and Financial Services Regulatory Practice Groups. First, a couple of housekeeping items. As regular listeners know, this call is being recorded. We will be emailing an audio link to all participants should you wish to listen to the teleconference again or forward it to your colleagues. In addition, the recording will be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Since we will not have a Q&A session, please send your questions regarding today's topic by email to gfm@mayorbrown.com, and we will respond promptly. This is the same email address on your invitation email. Joining me today is Mayor Brown partner Jonathan Becker. Jonathan is a partner in Mayor Brown's Washington, D.C. office and a member of the Public Policy, Regulatory, and Political Law practice. Prior to joining Mayor Brown, Jonathan worked in all three branches of the federal government, including in the White House, the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, and as Chief of Staff to Senator Amy Klobuchar, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Antitrust Subcommittee, which is very relevant for today's update. Today, Jonathan and I are going to provide a quick update on several key policy issues that are going to be at the center of congressional debates during the final months of the year, and that we think are important for market participants to carefully monitor. These issues are the fate of the Biden administration's Build Back Better plan and infrastructure bill, the renewed effort to raise the statutory debt limit, antitrust policy, and finally, the much anticipated nomination for Fed chair. With that brief introduction, we will now begin today's discussion. Jonathan, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. So as we know, congressional Democrats are hoping to nail down and finalize their roughly $2 trillion social policy and climate change framework that they hope to pass through a process known as reconciliation, which will only require 50 votes in the Senate to pass. These congressional leaders are racing to finalize details on the reconciliation bill by October 31st, which is the deadline they set to vote on a separate $1 trillion infrastructure bill that's intended to shore up roads, bridges, rail, as well as provide money for broadband, water treatment upgrades, and other measures. As has been widely reported, congressional Democrats have tied these two bills, the Social Policy Reconciliation or Build Back Better bill and the infrastructure bill, together. This has been an enormously complicated process that has taken months to work out. But more than the self-imposed deadline of October 31st, I think what's driving Democrats to now rush to finalize the package is the governor's race in Virginia. Election day in Virginia is November 2nd, and the Virginia off-year gubernatorial election is always a bellwether election and is considered a good gauge of the nation's views on the party in power. Should Democrats fail to reach agreement on their social policy bill by November 2nd, the fear among Democrats is that they may lose control of the governor's mansion in Virginia. This political calculation, combined with middling poll numbers for the president and an increasingly uneasy and impatient Democratic base, is likely driving the effort this week to get the deal done. My own view is that Democrats will come to a framework for their social policy bill and that they'll do so quickly. As we speak, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader have been meeting with the President in the White House. Central to these discussions is figuring out a way to pay for the social policy or Build Back Better bill. Democrats had initially hoped to raise marginal rates on well-off Americans as well as increase the corporate tax rate as a way to pay for this bill. But Senator Sinema of Arizona recently made clear that she'll not support any increase in marginal tax rates or capital gains increases. And in order to pass this bill, the president needs every single one of the 50 Senate Democrats. So Democrats have been scrambling to find other ways to pay for this approximately $2 trillion bill. On the table are proposals to tax billionaires' unrealized gains, as well as an excise tax on stock buybacks and a minimum 15% corporate tax rate. Now, what do we know about the substantive provisions of this Build Back Better bill? We can expect that any final package will include a universal pre-K program, subsidies for child care, paid family leave, and some tax incentives for clean energy sources. What's likely out of the bill? Free community college, which is something that most Democrat presidential candidates campaigned on in 2020. And what remains uncertain at this stage, among other things, is expanding Medicare to cover vision care, dental coverage, and hearing aids. Now, Senator Manchin of West Virginia has said he doesn't want to burden the Medicare system, but negotiators have been toying with the idea of providing vouchers for vision, dental, and hearing aids. So I think we'll learn a lot in the next few days, but again, I think the bill will likely come together before October 31st, or certainly before the Virginia gubernatorial election on November 2nd. For Democrats, it's make or break time, and I think moderates and progressives in the party will rise or fall together. And for all those reasons, I think you'll see a big package in the coming days and a vote shortly thereafter. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Jonathan. Earlier this month, Congress averted a default by the Treasury Department on U.S. debt by passing a last-minute bill to raise the statutory debt limit by $480 billion. The bill was a compromise between congressional Democrats, who wanted a longer-term extension of the debt limit, and congressional Republicans, who did not support increasing the debt limit on grounds that it facilitated the Biden administration's efforts to increase government spending in its Build Back Better legislation. Republicans wanted Democrats to use reconciliation procedures to raise the debt limit, which would have allowed them to pass the bill without any Republican votes. The compromise legislation merely pushes the debate over the debt limit to the end of November, as Treasury expects that the new debt limit will be hit in early December. Republicans continue to insist that Democrats pass the next debt limit increase through reconciliation. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is strongly resisting using reconciliation on the belief that public pressure to avoid a default will eventually cause Republicans to compromise and pass legislation through regular order, as happened earlier this month. Although the October compromise legislation was initially viewed as a victory for congressional Democrats, that conclusion is now less evident due to the fact that the debate around the debt limit will continue into November and therefore will require the attention of congressional Democrats when they are already in the midst of an intense intra-party negotiations over the Build Back Better legislation, as Jonathan just discussed. And they still must pass the annual appropriations bills, or, as is more likely, another continuing resolution to fund the government by the end of the year. In addition, the Senate Democrats are trying to confirm nominees, which requires additional Senate floor time. Hence, the debt limit is another headache Senate Democrats don't want or need right now. Going forward, I do not think that Congress will fail to raise the debt limit and cause a default on U.S. debt. Instead, I expect to see next month either congressional Democrats opt to pass a longer-term debt limit increase using reconciliation procedures, or in the alternative, another bipartisan short-term extension. In either case, Senate Democrats will once again have to divert scarce floor time and legislative energy from their other priorities. Accordingly, the biggest practical outcome of the upcoming debt limit debate could very well be a delay in the confirmation of nominees, more on that later, and consideration of other legislation before the end of the year. Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you now for an update on antitrust policy.
Thanks, Andrew. Before we talk about what's happening in Congress and in the agencies on antitrust, I think it's important to touch on the personnel issues at the senior leadership of the Department of Justice Antitrust Division and the Federal Trade Commission. As we like to say in Washington, personnel is policy. So if you want to know what's happening on antitrust policy, you need to know who the players are and where they are, frankly, in the process of getting into office. Now, 2 weeks ago, the Senate Judiciary Committee held its confirmation hearing on Jonathan Kanter, who the president nominated to head up the DOJ's antitrust division. The hearing was a bit of a love fest for both Republicans and Democrats alike. Both Democrats and Republicans seem to favor Kanter for his work in private practice, representing interests in opposition to big tech platforms. Kanter is a well-known critic of Google and other large technology companies. And one of the issues that came up at Jonathan Kanter's nomination hearing concerned questions antitrust enforcers in the Biden administration are purportedly asking merging parties about their ESG policies and labor issues. In fact, Senator Lee of Utah, the ranking member of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee, had sent a letter to the federal antitrust agencies on this subject, which is why it was not a surprise when Senator Lee asked the nominee directly if antitrust agencies should ask the targets of antitrust investigations about their ESG policies. Cantor affirmatively responded, quote, "Questions that are relevant to protecting competition are the kinds of questions that antitrust enforcement authorities should ask." Cantor continued, "I don't see situations where ESG policies that are unrelated to competitive issues are relevant to antitrust." This type of answer likely puts some Senate Republicans at ease, which is why some Senate Republicans will likely support Jonathan Cantor's nomination and why we expect the full Senate to soon confirm him to the position of Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. Little bit different story over at the Federal Trade Commission. There, the agency is operating with one of its 5 commissioner seats open after the president nominated and the Senate confirmed Commissioner Rohit Chopra to be the head of the Consumer Finance Protection Board. This, of course, means that the agency is operating with 2 commissioners appointed by Democrats and 2 appointed by Republicans. With a 2-2 tie, the agency can't sue to block mergers or move forward on rulemakings or other initiatives. Now, the president nominated someone to fill the 5th seat, Alvaro Bedoya, a well-known privacy law expert. But we're still waiting on his confirmation hearing. So unlike Jonathan Cantor, Alvaro Bedoya may face a tougher road to confirmation in the Senate. For one thing, many Senate Republicans have been unsettled by new FTC Chair Lina Khan's aggressive stance on the agency's competition mission. Industry is unhappy, and according to press reports, so too are some FTC staff. For this reason, Republicans will likely try to slow walk Bedoya's confirmation, because once he's confirmed, the agency will once again be in a 3-2 position, 3 Democrats to 2 Republican-appointed commissioners, and that means Lina Khan can embark on aggressive antitrust initiatives, rulemakings, lawsuits, and otherwise pursue Biden's very aggressive competition policy agenda. Now, what about antitrust policy in Congress? This week in Congress, a bipartisan group of senators introduced the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. This bill would prohibit dominant online platforms from wielding their power, their gatekeeper power, to preference their own products over other smaller online businesses that sell on the same platform. It's a companion measure to a bill already introduced in the House, but the Senate version is a bit more modest in that it incorporates a higher standard to bring a claim, and it doesn't include a private right of action like the House version. For this reason, the Senate bill has garnered a lot of Republican support, including from Chuck Grassley of Iowa, who's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Josh Hawley of Missouri, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and others. A bunch of Democrats also support the bill, including Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota, who introduced the bill, Senator Hirono, and others. And we don't often see Senators Hawley and Durbin, Graham and Hirono on a bill, but strange bedfellows in the Senate is often a recipe for legislative success. And we'll see in the coming weeks if this bill has a chance of passing. If so, it would represent one of the first legislative attempts to rein in the large tech platforms, something that Congress has been talking about for a few years now, but has yet to be able to do. So in sum, the coming months are going to be a very active time for antitrust policy, both at the agencies and within Congress. There's real activity in the legislature, as we just talked about, and once the competition agencies are fully staffed at their senior political levels, they'll likely be very aggressive in enforcement and will take a broad view of antitrust policy, one that will likely gain the support of progressives, but at the same time, trigger the ire of Republicans in Congress and many in industry. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Jonathan. I will now cover probably the biggest question right now about financial services policy, which is who will be the next Fed chair? At this point, Chair Jay Powell is still likely to be nominated. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party has sought to derail the nomination, but it looks as if a renomination is still likely at this point. It would be a highly unusual and risky move for the administration, any administration, to nominate a new Fed chair without first signaling its intentions to the financial markets and the Senate prior to the nomination. In recent years, nominations for Fed chairs have been made by the end of October so that the nominee can have a confirmation hearing before the Christmas break and then be confirmed by the Senate in January. Accordingly, regardless of who the nominee is, a nomination really has to be made by the middle of November at the absolute latest in order for the nominee to be confirmed before the expiration of Chair Powell's term as chair on February 5th. A delay in the nomination past the middle of November means that the confirmation hearing and or committee vote on the nomination would likely not happen until next year, and a confirmation by the full Senate would not occur until after Powell's term expires. My own personal guess is that at this point, President Biden will likely announce his nominee to be Fed chair by the end of next week. And looking at the political calendar, when President Biden returns from the UN Climate Change Conference next week, is shaping up to be a good time to make that announcement. If that's the time frame, it should provide just enough time to confirm the nominee in January, even if it is late by recent precedents. However, the delay in the nomination of the Fed chair could impact the confirmation of nominees to the other open board seats at the Federal Reserve Board. Vice Chair Clarida's board seat is up in January, and there is already an open seat. Plus, Governor Quarles' term as vice chair for supervision has expired, but not his seat on the board, which goes until 2032. Thus, President Biden can make 2 additional nominations, including one for vice chair for supervision. Because the Senate will likely prioritize the confirmation of the Fed chair nominee, even if President Biden were to promptly announce nominees for those board seats and the Senate Banking Committee promptly held hearings on them, it's still hard to see how they could be confirmed before late January at the very earliest. Further, it would be an exceptional case for the Senate Banking Committee to hold a confirmation hearing on a Fed chair and then hold another hearing for 2 or 3 governor nominees and then vote them all out to the full Senate in less than a month. The governor nominees, therefore, will be exceptionally lucky to get a confirmation hearing by the end of this year. And as I mentioned earlier, with the Senate having to consider a revised Build Back Better plan, pass the annual appropriations bill or a CR, and deal with the debt limit, there simply isn't a lot of time for the Senate to spend on confirming nominees. Hence, it's very likely we won't see any new governors on the Fed until well into 2022. Thank you to our audience for tuning in today. A few brief reminders. You will receive an email with a link to the recording of today's call, and the recording will also be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Lastly, as I mentioned before, if you have any questions related to today's content, please email them to gfm@mayorbrown.com. Thank you again for your participation. You may now all disconnect.